I'm Heather. After many wasted years trying outdated approaches to my daughter's addiction that felt wrong to me, harmed our relationship, and didn't help my daughter, I finally found an effective, evidence-based approach that repaired my relationship with her, helped me create my own peace of mind, and made me an ally in my daughter's recovery. I teach you a loving and compassionate approach to help you encourage change and create connection. Addiction impacts the entire family system. Family recovery is the answer. Okay, one more quick thing before the episode starts. If you ever worry about enabling, which I hear that word all the time, so many parents are worried about it, I made a guide for you. This guide will give you a new relationship with enabling. It will help you be confident in yourself and your decisions. Also, it will give you 3 science-backed ways to help your child. So the link for the guide is going to be in the show notes today. Hi, Cathy. Thank you so much for coming on the podcast to share your experience with parent coaching with us.
Thank you so much for having me, Heather. I really appreciate it and love this opportunity to be part of your podcast, your wonderful podcast.
So let's start by having you tell us how you got started working with parents.
Sure, no problem. Like many of us, I had substance use issues in my family with my kids. I have 3 children, 2 sons and a daughter. And my oldest son got very caught up in marijuana and was dependent on that to the point where we were really concerned about him because he just wasn't really living, his best life. And we could just see he was depressed and had anxiety and all those kinds of things. And then when my daughter was 19, she was off in trying to go to college in Colorado, which was not going well at all. And we discovered that she had a crystal meth dependency, that she was addicted to crystal meth. So that's how I got thrown into this. It was nothing. My family had not really ever, as a child, I had not experienced this at all. My dad had been married before, and his first wife did have a major alcohol problem. So I have 2 older brothers, 2 half brothers, and they had a little bit of a different experience. They had a hard time with her during the years. But for myself and my brother, who's 2 years older, my parents were very cognizant of all that kind of thing. So this experience with my kids, I just started going to meetings. I started learning more about it. I started realizing how many parents were in this situation and how confused all of us were. We're all just trying to find answers. And it was just so difficult. So I was at a point in my life, my original career was teaching. I taught in elementary education, but I had retired a little bit early. And so I had a few years where I was just kind of retired, but I always wanted to do more. I just felt like I just needed to do more. And this had just stuck with me. So I started a website and originally thought, people can come in and talk about treatment centers and that kind of thing. But then I realized that really wasn't something that was going to happen too much. And so I started blogging and then started working. The Parents to End Addiction, the Partnership to End Addiction reached out and I got connected with them. And I think it helps to be connected with a group. I think when you're on your own, you could be super helpful. But I also think these organizations that you and I are both connected with really help you feel like you're part of a community and that kind of thing. And I wanted to coach. That was something that I started working on my own. I thought, I think being a coach would be helpful, just trying to help parents and hopefully have less confusion that I had when I was going through this. And so at that point is when it all kind of came together because I was asked to go to New York. It was that initial training for the Partnership to End Addictions coaching program. It was a volunteer coaching program with peers. And so I went, and that was my first introduction to the CRAFT approach, community reinforcement and family training. And when I heard about that, when I learned more about that, I thought, oh my gosh, this is exactly what I want to do. By this point, my daughter had been in a treatment program and she was doing well. My son we did an intervention with him and we did some other things, and he didn't want to do any of that, but did do counseling. So he was on a better path too. And for him, it was just a slower progress, I think. I'm not sure why. Maybe it was just because the marijuana, you have a harder time realizing that it's a problem. I think she knew clearly. She was at a point where she realized this isn't going to work for me anymore. But anyway, so I was not able to use craft with my own children that much, although I have since then, even with them in recovery and through their change process, I use it all the time just to have a better relationship with them. But so I just became passionate about the topic. I think it sort of angered me that so many of our kids were going down this road. And I'm a nurturer type. That's who I am. And so it just seemed like a good fit. And I think in some ways it just found me. I mean, I just happened to be here. The timing was right and all of that kind of thing. So.
Yeah. And I like that you mentioned that even though you weren't using craft with your kids initially, that it still helps with your relationship now. Because I think that that's really important. Like, this isn't just a skill that we use when our kids are actively struggling with substances. I think it can be used in all relationships.
Absolutely. And even for other problems it's based on substance use, but I think it can be used, especially for parents, for other issues that are coming up. I think it's a great approach.
Yeah. And I'm blending, every time I talk about craft, I'm kind of blending craft and invitation to change together. Sometimes I do that. And so I'm thinking of both of those together when I say that it can help with any relationship.
Right. No, absolutely. I agree. They're wonderful programs.
So what does family recovery mean to you? And why do you think that it's important for family or for parents to work on themselves alongside their kids?
Okay, sure. Family recovery, I mean, it can be spouses or parents or even aunts and uncles, whatever, grandparents. I mainly have focused on parents just because that's what I knew. That seemed to make sense for me. But I just wanted to clarify that the craft or the invitation changes for any family member. But for parents, substance use is difficult. It's very challenging. When parents work with their children, if they're feeling exhausted, overwhelmed, just tired all the time, they're not going to be making the best choices. It's going to be really difficult. And I think also something that I've realized along the way too is what happened, I think, so often in the past is we have our struggling child over here and the family group over here and the substance, the child with the substance use is the one with all the problems and the family members don't have anything they need to work on. Let's just solve this problem with this child. And I realized early on that is just not the best approach. I think we all bring something to the table when it comes to substance use, whether it's the parents, the siblings, whatever. And I think it's important for everyone to learn about addiction and to do their own work. Addiction's tricky. And I think for siblings, often I see siblings get upset with parents or they feel like the parents are being taken advantage of, or they see how exhausted their mom or dad is. And I get that. It's hard to watch. But I do encourage siblings to learn about addiction because many times siblings have not done any work at all. They just are seeing the downfall. And so it causes more conflict. So I think it's important for family counseling can be helpful. Reading the books, Beyond Addiction, the other book, Get Your Loved Ones Sober, all the books that are out there that I think are helpful, whatever, there's many of them out there that can resonate with people. And just doing the work. And for parents, I feel like parents sometimes, and I feel like I did this too. I felt when I was going through it, I was working, I was a single mother at the time, just trying to put one foot in front of the other. I wasn't really looking at my life and being introspective about how things were going. And I think when the substance use happened, it was really a wake-up call for our family. It's like we're just kind of plodding along and we're not really thinking things through on how our kids are doing. So I think one thing that happens with parents too is you can bring things from your own childhood into your parenting that maybe you haven't resolved, maybe you haven't worked on. And substance use can be just another reflection of that. There's a problem in this family and the substance use is reflecting that, not just for the child, but for the young person or whoever, it might be an adult child, but for everybody. So family recovery is so important. It's just, I think parents, the first step is really understanding what's going on. You have to honestly, at the beginning, I think many parents go through that denial stage. I knew I did. And you kind of are throwing everything you can think of at the problem, hoping it'll go away. Just think back to all the crazy stuff I was thinking would maybe work, but you're scrambling. You're just throwing like spaghetti on the wall, hoping something will work. And then when you realize it doesn't, I think that's when the real work begins. You want to really look at what the issues are, what your contribution is, what the dynamics are in the family, all those kind of things, and the trauma that your child may have gone through, or that maybe your whole family's gone through. I mean, it's hard to know, but definitely, I strongly suggest that parents don't assume that it's just this one person that needs help. It's really everyone, to look at it and to have compassion for yourself, for your child, for the other people in the family that are struggling.
Yeah, there's a lot of good stuff in there. You mentioned parents having introspection. And I think that's one of the really hard parts, because like for me, I was so outwardly focused on my daughter that it was just her that needed to change. And that just made things worse. And then once I realized that her substance use was like a mirror, kind of pointing out all of these things in my life that I needed to work on, and started like listening to those cues that I was getting and started working on those things, that's when we started really changing our relationship. And I was able to take a different approach, along with everything that I was learning, like you said, like learning to understand addiction at that time and see it differently, and not try to simplify it as much as I was. I was just trying to really take the simplified approach for something complex. So I really like all that you said in there. And you also mentioned at the end having compassion. And you recently wrote a book called The Compassion Antidote. I love that name. So can you tell us a little bit about the book and why you chose that name?
Sure. No, thank you. And I just want to mention too, you certainly aren't alone in having it be a mirror, because I had that same incident with our family too. But yeah, so I wrote The Compassion Antidote. My thought behind it, and actually what happens, I think a lot of times when people write books, I wrote it and then send it out to a few people, and it's like, oh, okay, I need to do this, need to do that. And I thought, I just need to take a break from this for a while. So I shelved it for a few years, and then I pulled it out again. I thought, let's try this again and just see if I can make this happen. And the idea was that I had read the Beyond Addiction and many of these books from the professionals. And I thought maybe a book from a parent/coach who has learned this information, and this is why I like it. And just another voice saying, this can be really helpful information. And I thought the idea was to keep it super simple, fairly short, just giving people the basics. It's just another way to share the information as an additional book. Somebody wants to get more information about it. So compassion for me, it was really one of the things that I've learned really early on with craft and invitation change. And really wasn't anything that I thought about necessarily. I mean, I always felt like I was loving with my kids and I cared about them and I was super concerned about these issues. But I didn't really understand that the more empathetic you were, the more compassionate you were, the more understanding you put into the problem was really what was going to help your child. So I really was lucky. Someone actually, I would love to say I made up the name, but somebody suggested it to me. And I thought, oh, I like that because it's just a little different. Antidote really is something that counteracts or neutralizes an unpleasant feeling. So I felt like that was a nice description of how to approach substance use. Like compassion is something that can just help soothe this a little bit, give yourself another focus, that kind of thing. And so the book covers many of the topics of craft, of self-care. I start out with looking at the problem and then the self-care piece, which is so important, giving people ideas on what they can do. Change is one area that I talk about a little bit. And what are some things that help with change and what are some things that don't help with change? For example, if we're pushing our kids often and just repeating the same things over and over again, it just tends to be not so helpful. I mean, they just tune us out after a while. Or another thing that I found was helpful is to have other people bring, if you're a parent working with your child, and many times parents will isolate, they're embarrassed about the problem. But what can really help is to bring in other people. It could be friends or relatives, a counselor, whatever works for you, maybe a coach for your child or whatever, but giving that same message. So your child's hearing this message from a number of different people will have them listening a little bit more if it's just you as a parent repeating the same things. So it's incorporating many of the craft ideas. Again, positive reinforcement, boundaries is a big one for many. The idea of enabling, what works for enabling, what doesn't work for enabling, and just trying to give parents some hope, just a glimpse of a little light along the way, and seeing if there's some ideas that they can take from this book. And I think too, sometimes when you read a book, you'll get some ideas, and then you read a book from a different author and you might get some other ideas, or it's worded differently and it resonates with you differently. So I just thought it doesn't hurt to just have the more information on these approaches that I found so helpful and so powerful. And always will be grateful for these psychologists, Robert Myers, Jeff Foote, Carrie Wilkins, all these people, Ken, all the people at the different organizations who have really focused their work on getting this out to families, parents, and I think it's so helpful. So, yeah. And I will say real quick, the audiobook's coming out. I'm really excited. So that's right in the process, probably maybe this week or next week. So that's coming out soon. So that'll be nice.
That is good. I love listening. Yeah. And I appreciate everybody that you mentioned too, and the community that they've created for us doing this work, because it does make a difference. Like, just like parents need community when their kids are struggling, like we need community to help us be able to reach more families that need help. And as you were talking about compassion, I was thinking about how it's kind of it's the opposite of a lot of what we hear. We hear this tough love advice. And your coaching involves a lot of craft and ITC framework. So what results do you see in families that take that approach versus the tough love approach?
Well, that's a good question. What I do see a lot of is frustration on parents, especially when they first connect with me or join what I have an online group, if they join that group or however we connect, or in my ITC groups. They're very frustrated by getting this message that they need to let go of their child or they need to put tough love into place. It just feels very counterintuitive. And honestly, I think it adds more stress for them. It's just like, okay, we have this problem. Now we're trying to go in a certain direction, or we're being asked to go in a certain direction, and it just doesn't feel right. So I think parents, when I hear this, and it's been really interesting to hear as the years went along, because at the beginning, when craft was first being introduced, parents had never heard about it. I mean, they would stumble upon me for whatever reason. And then if I said, well, do you know about Beyond Addiction? Do you know about the craft approach? They knew nothing about it. And then as the years went on, it was so interesting to watch parents say, oh yeah, I read Beyond Addiction, or I do know about it. So usually that is what has parents reaching out when they want that more compassionate and a different approach, an approach that isn't about the tough love. And I've had parents who have tried the tough love. I had a couple parents. One example is a parent who was told, just let your child go. Don't. She was in Northern California. I believe he was in Florida. And, she didn't hear from him for a while, and he had relapsed, and she thought, okay, it just was gnawing at her. I need to go see. And she did finally get down to Florida and found him, and he was in a homeless shelter and not doing well at all. She said, I feel like if I hadn't have gone down there, he would not probably be here today. And so those kind of stories are the ones that I think parents feel like, okay, this isn't the right approach. I had another mom whose son was on a year-long camping trip. She had at least a little sense of humor about it for a while. And she finally, too, same thing, just thought, and went and got him. And parents struggle. I mean, do I bring them home? They're not completely on the recovery path. What do I do? But she said, I'm going to bring him home, and we're going to just start working on this step by step. and more of a harm reduction approach, more of meeting him where they are. And of course, there's steps forward, there's steps back, but both of these young men are doing better now. And it's not been perfect, but I definitely think both of these moms in this particular instance feel like if they had just stuck with that tough love approach, they're just not sure what would have happened. It was just too stringent, too harsh. And I think that's one thing that's super important. And I tell parents too, you know your child better than anybody. Listen to your instincts, listen to what you think is right. Hear it, learn as much as you can, educate yourself, but also go with what you feel is the right thing to do. And so I think many parents have felt like a huge sense of relief when they realize, I don't have to let go of my child, or I don't have to do this tough love approach, and that there are options. And I'm sure you do the same thing, Heather. I don't say to parents, you have to do it this way, you have to do it that way. That's what I love about craft. They're not saying that. They're saying, here are some ideas to think about. You figure out what you think is going to work for you. And everyone might not resonate with everything with the craft or the ITC, but they're going to pull things that they can work, that are going to work for them. So I think that is, to me, it makes so much sense. And I think parents I hear it all the time. This is such a relief. The other thing I want to add that I do suggest sometimes to parents, as I just sort of mentioned, is, and I heard this term from another counselor, a patchwork approach. Just some people like to combine the traditional meetings with craft, with ITC, and that's fine. Or some people go to smart recovery meetings and then pull in ITC and the craft approach as well. So pulling what works for you and creating something that makes sense for you, I think is really valuable and helpful. But again, we know that compassion, empathy, staying close, continuing that communication, it's better for everyone. Parents feel more positive. Kids usually feel more positive. It's just a better environment for all involved. So,
yeah, I totally agree. And I'm the same way. You mentioned that, like, I will tell a parent that I'll support you no matter how you want to approach this, but let's look at all the way through both ways that you might possibly, different avenues that you might take. Like, let's look all the way through it to see how that's going to feel, what it's going to take, and just create space to think all the way through. Like, I wish that I had even that in the beginning. Does somebody help me to see all these different paths that were available to me? And as I was listening to you talk, I remembered that. So you and Cordelia talked in a group, and somebody that heard you guys do that talk went and got the book Beyond Addiction and read it. And she ended up going to another state to find her son that had been struggling with substance use for many years. And just listening to you guys talk and reading that book gave her the patience to go there and work through things with him and wait patiently while he got things together. And he agreed to go to treatment. And it was like he's, I think, like 7 to 9 months in recovery now after that. And I just, like, you didn't even know that your talk did that, and I forgot about it until right now listening to you talk. So it's amazing what a parent can do with just a few new tools and new thought shifts on how to approach things. Like, that helped that mother go and get her child do exactly what he needed her to do to help him get into treatment. It's incredible.
No, that's really great to hear. I know the interview with Cordelia has resonated. It's one of the more popular ones. I mean, people I got an email recently from somebody saying, I really, really like that interview. She shares some great information, and I think she can connect with people in a way that they just understand what she's saying and they can pick it up, and she's inspiring to people and that kind of thing. So, that makes me feel so good. I'm so glad to hear that mom, that helped. That's really very rewarding to hear that.
Yeah. And that's just one story, right? I'm sure there's many more that you'll never know. And you were talking earlier about something about enabling came up. And I think that parents, they fear that so much. Like, and that's what they're often told too, like, don't enable, but then nobody tells you what that really means. what you actually should do, just telling you what not to do. And then they're just left with all this fear and overwhelm about trying not to enable. How do you help parents work through that?
And it's an issue that comes up all the time. And I'll put out in the groups, what are some topics you want to talk about in enabling? That one, and boundaries, comes up all the time. So yeah, enabling, it's a tough one. And I know it's a word we don't want to be calling anyone an enabler. We don't really want to be calling anyone a codependent, because it's just another negative term for family members and parents. So I had a conversation actually yesterday with a parent who was saying, I have my child at home and I'm getting feedback from family members and friends that I'm enabling him. He shouldn't be there. I believe he was working a little bit on his recovery, but he wasn't as far along as she was hoping that he would be, but he was making small steps. And she goes, I don't want to kick him out, but I just feel like people are telling me I should do that. And I think it's so hard when people get this message that you have to go in one approach, is there's only one right way to do this. And I said to her too, it's interesting. And my guess is that probably those family and friends do not have a child with addiction issues. They haven't studied addiction. They don't really know any of probably the craft information, the invitation change information, yet they're giving you these comments. And she goes, yeah, you're right. They don't. So, it was a group situation, and we had some lovely parents chime in and just say, in that kind of a situation, the downside is the child's could be taken advantage of. They could be in a harmful situation. You've lost your ability to communicate with them and all those kind of things. So you have to weigh, I think, the consequences of your actions every time. And I think the hard part is that it is a judgment call every time. There's not a clear-cut answer. But one thing that I have held on to, and years ago, I did an interview with Christopher Kennedy Lawfoot, who unfortunately has passed away, but he mentioned to support your child's recovery, not their continued use. And I don't know if that's exactly the way he put it, but that was the gist of the comment. And I've said that up to parents often, and I've had a lot of parents say, wait, say that again. I want to write that down. So I think that's the question you always ask yourself. Am I supporting my child getting healthy, doing better, or am I supporting his continued use? And even in the sense of this mother who has her child at home, she was communicating with him. She's working with him. She's continuing the conversation. She's providing options for him. And I think the other thing that we always have to remember too is patience is so important in this process. And it's baby steps. I mean, most of our kids are not going to take a leap from A to Z. It's going to be small little steps forward. So again, I think that Craft and Beyond Addiction and the ITC program really do a great job of helping us understand that enabling is not, let me say it this way. I think we all start out maybe a little bit. I know I was guilty of that too, of, as I mentioned earlier, just trying to do whatever you can to help. But it's not so helpful. And as you work with your child a bit further, it's good to really take a look at these issues, to take a look at how you're approaching the problem, and to try to really work in a way that's going to help your child move forward. I think one of the main things that we come up, and I know I'm sure you've come across this too, is the money issue, not giving money to our kids who are then just going to go turn around and buy drugs or alcohol with it. And another thing that I have found that comes up is collaboration with two parents, whether you're married, divorced, or partners, or whatever it is. That one parent can be pretty good about boundaries or being clear with what their expectations are, and they follow through and that kind of thing. Whereas another parent might not be so good. And so the child learns how to, whether they're adults, teens, or whatever, they can figure out the wiggle room kind of between the two parents, or they're getting this mixed message that isn't so helpful. So one thing I think, especially is with the boundaries, is to be super clear with yourself. First of all, this is a boundary that I am sure that I want to follow through with. And then that next step of actually not backing down and not having your child kind of manipulate you out of something or have you change course when you don't feel that that's appropriate. So much of the enabling, I think, is really just being really clear with ourselves, what we're willing to do. And I think another thing that I love about this approach is that their point is saying, we're not going to tell you that you have to have this boundary or that boundary. But whatever you do, just make sure you're going to follow through. So again, it's the parent's judgment call on what they can handle. And I think too, sometimes there's also the point that if a certain boundary is causing you so much stress, then it's okay to look at that and maybe do something a little bit different. And so sometimes we do have to do things that aren't exactly maybe the perfect situation, I think, but for most of the time, you really want to work with yourself, work with your child, and make sure you're being clear and that you are supporting healthy behavior.
Yeah. And I like that craft and ITC like give you a framework to work with rather than rules like you mentioned. I think that that is very empowering. And I always tell people that like you're the only one that has to live with the consequences of what you do. Those people who are so sure that everything you're doing is wrong don't have to live with the consequences of your decisions. And I mean, I know firsthand what it's like to have to live through that and go through every single thing that I did along their journey and wonder if it would have made things different. So, and I just don't think that people think about that. And you're right. A lot of them probably have not dealt with their own child's substance use. And I think the most supportive thing that we can do for somebody else is to just create space for them to make their own decisions for their family because they're the only ones that have to live with it. And there were times like that I had, like I was just maybe out of town and I would do something different than I would normally do. Like I remember being at a conference once and my daughter sent me a message. She's like, I need money for tampons. And I'm like, there's no way I'm going to say no to that. I can spend this whole time worrying about how I'm going to get them to her or whatever, or I can send her $10 through Cash App right now and not think about it again. Is it probably going to drugs? Maybe, but at least I could be present where I was and not be trying to figure out all of these other things. So sometimes it's just a judgment call of preserving ourselves and our ability to enjoy our lives and be present in other situations and not always just thinking about them and what's going on with them as well.
Good point. Yeah, absolutely. And like I said, there are times when you just feel like you have to make a decision one way or the other, and it's okay. It's okay. So I think parents have to have a little compassion for ourselves too and not be so hard on ourselves. I know we do the best we can, really, in a very difficult situation.
Absolutely. That compassion's got to be a two-way street.
Mm-hmm.
And when I first found the book Beyond Addiction and I was Googling, trying to find out about craft, you were the only parent coach that came up at the time. So you were one of the very early people doing this. So I consider you like one of the more seasoned coaches in this space. What are some of the biggest lessons that you have learned through your experience doing this work with parents?
Well, there's many. I mean, one just basically is just, it's been so rewarding. And first of all, I've met so many amazing parents. But I think when I think of how I used to think of addiction and then how I think of it now, the shift in thinking of someone being bad or having no values and realizing rather than going down that road, but thinking there's a trauma involved or there's a reason. And it may not be a trauma, but there was just a definite reason behind the use. And that some of these ideas, like our kids are getting a benefit from it, was not really something I sat and spent a lot of time thinking about. So that was something that I really take away from the craft for sure. And that parents, it's our job as parents to really, I feel, start with having an understanding of the problem, really do some of that work first. So those were some of the things that immediately come up. But it's been such an interesting journey, I guess I would say. I mean, what's been fun is to have been in that very first group with the partnership and then watch this whole thing evolve. And honestly, I mean, I think we all need patience too, because I think we all wish it would evolve a little bit more quickly and that the treatment centers would embrace the craft a little bit more than they do. Some do, some don't. But it's a wonderful program. As I said, I think parents just embrace it for the most part. They are just so relieved to find that they can help their kids and there are things that they can do. And that, again, we can't control everything that our child does. We can control some of our reaction to it. We control ourselves, but we can't live someone else's life for them. But I think the idea of motivating them, of having that communication, and for me, the big piece, I love all of it, but I think the communication for me has always been the big one. I think that seems to change the way people interact with their kids so much. I mean, they just stop and say, oh my gosh, okay, I'm going to really approach this a different way. And when they do, 9 times out of 10, they see different results. So that has been huge. And it's just exciting. I mean, it's very rewarding and it's just been so game changing for so many people. I mean, I get emails from people often, I got one recently, received an email from a mom my child is, we've been working with him forever and now we're really changing the way we're approaching this issue and he's on a much better path and things are really looking up and that kind of thing. So that's great. I mean, it's just wonderful to hear. And you want parents to have some concrete tools with this problem. It's huge. I mean, it's huge and it can destroy families so easily. So I think this is such a gift for all of us that this approach is here and that if we can spread it out as far and as wide as possible, I mean, I'm happy to do that. I know that's the work you're doing as well, Heather, and it's all good. I mean, it's a wonderful approach and I've learned so much. I think hopefully I've helped a few people, but I've probably been more rewarded myself from doing this work. So I can't say enough about it. I think it's great.
Yeah, I agree. It's so rewarding to know that hopefully we're going to be able to reach parents. Like for me, that I'm going to be able to reach parents hopefully sooner than I would. It took me 5 years to find help that worked. And I get really excited every time a new group of people comes into that just finished the level 1 training for the Invitation to Change group. And every time a new group of them comes into our monthly calls, and seeing the network grow and their excitement and what they're all bringing to it, and knowing that pretty soon it's going to be a lot easier to find, like that makes my heart so happy every time I see that, to know that more parents and family members are going to be able to find this information sooner than I was able to.
Absolutely. And I'm out here in California. And I know when I went to that first meeting, just learning about the first craft 10 years ago, the furthest person west was from Kansas. And so I was out here in California. And now we've got Cordelia in Oregon. We've got people in Washington. And I had a ITC parent reach out to me, another one in California. So we have several now in California. And you're just watching it. And then Sarah Zucker, who's one psychologist, has an office in San Diego. So it's so exciting to see it really come across the country and to expand and grow. And I think when people do learn about it, they get excited, and it's rewarding to help people. It's rewarding to learn about it first for your own child, and then it's rewarding to help other people try to learn this information.
Yeah. So can you tell us what support you offer and then how people find you and your book?
Sure. So I have my book that's out there, and you can find it on Amazon. You can find it through the library. I know some parents, they're strapped on treatment and all that. So you can always go to Overdrive or Libby and some of those places and just request it if people want to do that. But it's on Amazon. It's on many of the other book retailers as well. I have a online support group, Regain Your Hope, and I walk people through many of the ideas around craft. It's a video course, and also bring some other things into that one as well. We have an online support group, and we also meet monthly. So if parents have issues or they just want to check in, and they can always reach out to me too. So that's another way that they can do that. I'm not coaching as much as I was, so I'm kind of passing that baton to some of you younger gals. I do coach a little bit if people really want it, but I'm not coaching as much as I am. But I do have a free parent of children struggling with drugs or alcohol. There's a group on Facebook. We add in craft information as well. And then I'm on all the normal social media sites. But I also have some free resources. I have the first chapter of my book is available. You can download that for free, or a free ebook, 10 Tips to Start the Change Process When Your Child Struggles with Substance Use. And with that, if you sign up for that, then you'll be on my email list. I send in a Sunday newsletter, which just do a little blurb of information and then have links to a few different articles. Or if I also try to bring in, like, if there's something going on with craft from the CMC or from Cordelia or whoever, I just try to bring those links into and pass that along. So, yeah. So you can, I've got the websites there. It's cathytaughinbaugh.com. And I don't know if you want me to spell it.
I'll put it in the show notes so that anybody who can just go click on the link.
Right. Yeah. So you can just check it out. It's all there and it's pretty easy to navigate. I think there's lots of articles, hundreds of articles. So if there's a topic, you can just search it and there's a little search section, and you can find just whatever you're looking for that might be helpful. So, and lots of interviews too. So I'm excited because I'll say this too, Heather is going to be one of our new interviews, and I'll have that up shortly on YouTube. That's available. And then I also pull those into my, just the craft interviews I pull into my Regain Your Hope group too. But the interviews I do have on YouTube for anyone. And I have several other interview videos too, just on different topics that people can just look through. So you can find me there as well.
Okay. Well, thank you so much for your time today. I really appreciate you sharing all this great information with us.
Thank you, Heather. I really appreciate you having me, and I appreciate all that you're doing to help families as well.
Thank you for listening to this episode. If you want to learn more about my work, go to heatherrosscoaching.com. If you want to help other parents who are struggling with a child's addiction, you can do it two different ways. First, you can share the podcast with them directly, or you can share it on your social media. Second, you can leave a review. Talk to you next week.